Hey, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Gene Martin. Thanks for joining us on the Hartford Small Biz Ahead podcast. Happy to have you here. I am very happy to have Megan Bruneau here. Megan is a psychologist, a therapist, an executive coach as well. Megan, before we just started, you made some comment about me being able to pronounce your name as an American. Where are you based out of?
So normally I'm in New York. I'm actually in Nashville right now, recording from Nashville. But yes, normally I'm based out of New York, but I'm originally from British Columbia, Canada. So a lot of my life I spent in Vancouver. Yes, exactly.
So now I know where that reference came from. I was wondering, she made that American that had to come from. I play squash with a guy who's from Saskatchewan.
Oh, okay.
Right? And he is constantly making fun of Americans. So
right. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's a French last name, so
it is.
I don't expect you to know how to pronounce it, but you did very well.
Thank you. I try and I do appreciate that. Okay, so you're an executive coach. So tell us about your job. Tell us what you do and how you help your clients and who your clients are.
Totally. Well, I can't tell you exactly who my clients are because that would be breaching confidentiality, but
I can speak in hypotheticals.
Yes, exactly. I can tell you that most of my clients actually at this point are male entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs of all genders, all sexes or whatever, but mostly male entrepreneurs who have reached a point where they are recognizing that they're getting in their own way, either in terms of achieving the success that they want, but also in terms of actually achieving the fulfillment, joy, connection, presence that they want. A lot of my clients became entrepreneurs because they want freedom and they realize now that they've kind of created a cage for themselves and feel actually quite trapped. Right. So oftentimes people come to coaching or therapy, both of which I offer. And actually, I don't make a huge distinction between the two of them, but a lot of people come just when they're, in a place where they want to either make like a choice or a change of some sort, but also if they realize they just need some support. And I think more and more now it's becoming clear, like just how much coaching and therapy can help a person on their journey. And it's not about coming from a place of pathology or there's something wrong with you. It's more like, hey, like if you want to be able to reach that next milestone, if you want to be able to, scale your company to the point at which maybe you can, step away from it or make yourself more obsolete or irrelevant in a positive way, then it can be helpful to have someone to sort of stand beside you on that journey.
So I wrote about this a couple of years ago. I think it was for like Entrepreneur or Inc. And I wrote a story about a client of mine. And I want to ask you about the whole male versus female
thing.
That
Absolutely.
Too. But,
yeah.
This client of mine is he's one of two partners at a business, guy in his 50s, company, like 100 employees or whatever. And he started seeing a therapist on his own, a psychologist,
Great.
Now, as men over the age of 50, we come from a generation where, we don't talk about that stuff, like that's like, right. And I'm that guy as well. And yet I remember, Megan, like when my wife and I, we went through like infertility before our kids were born, and
so
it was
hard.
And it was a lot harder on her than it was on me. She went through a tough period, and we went and saw a therapist about it who specialized in infertility. And I had to be dragged there, kicking and screaming, like, what do I need to see this person about, whatever. And it was, this woman was like awesome. I mean, we went through like half a dozen times because, and I'm going to get to, my point here with you is that this woman that we saw, she specialized in this, is that she knew the language, she knew where people were coming from. She didn't come with an agenda. She wasn't a family member or a friend. She was just an outsider being paid to listen to our issues and then to just offer some third-party advice, really, on how to deal with those issues. And I can't think of a better type of service to provide to a business owner.
Totally.
Just that.
Yes.
And is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the executive coaching, there's a little bit more strategy involved than simply focusing on like the emotional piece and, the psychological piece and whatever, but it's so like inextricably connected. But yes, I mean, I think people are realizing that they need to take that space and, we strategize on our businesses, but we don't strategize enough on our mental health and our well-being, which is just shocking to me, right? And you're right, especially as a man over 50, there's so much stigma around not only just asking for help in general, but asking for help about something that has so much shame around it as like our mental health. Men especially are socialized from a young age to really like not have any space for emotions other than, happiness and calm, and sometimes anger. Like sometimes there's that dominant anger that you're allowed, but you're not supposed to feel anxious. You're not supposed to feel lonely. You're not supposed to feel sad or disappointed or shame or anything like that. And, it's interesting, like, the last speaking gig I did was at South by Southwest around, essentially entrepreneurial mental health. It was called How to Keep Your Shit Together as an Entrepreneur. And it was a packed room. And there were people that came up, it was a panel. And there were people who came up to us afterwards and were like, I have, in my 7 years of going to this conference, I've never found something so helpful. And I think, sure, the content was really helpful. The speakers were amazing. But what it came down to is that there were so many people in one room being like, oh, I'm not the only one who's struggling with this. Yeah. So there's so much shame and so much like self-judgment and anxiety around needing help or perceiving oneself to need help. We all need help. And so yes, ultimately being able to create a space where it's like, hey, this is 50 minutes a week or whatever it is, where you can focus in on like what you're struggling with in your business, but also really recognize where, all of that and the way that you're treating yourself and the way that you're coping or not coping is actually not only preventing you from achieving the success that you want, but also preventing you from being able to enjoy your life and your relationships for that matter.
Because there's a lot of those issues, talking about balancing your family life and your work life,
Totally.
Dealing with the stresses of running a business. And I'm telling you, my client, and again, my age, I've known him for 20 years. He's like, it's like he looks forward to the hour every week.
Totally.
It's no judgment, no nothing.
No.
It's just, and he talks about, again, it's family issues, but his work issues as well and all. Megan, what's the difference between a therapist and an executive coach?
Yeah. Honestly, as I said before, I don't make a huge distinction at this point. Coaching, we could say, is a little bit more directive. So it's a little bit more kind of like, hey, I'm going to bring in things like accountability, right? And maybe have homework over the week in terms of journaling questions or certain meditation practices or, a lot of the work that I do. And we may get into this because I think this is at the root of both, our not achieving the success we want, but also, a lot of our emotional pain is avoidance, what we would call experiential avoidance. So when a person starts to learn like where they're, avoiding certain emotions such as anxiety or such as the potential for disappointment, the potential for failure, which is an emotion, but has a lot of difficult emotions with it. When a person starts to recognize where they're just like trying to stay in their comfort zone and avoiding certain potential experiences that ultimately cause difficult emotions, that's when they can recognize, oh, this is how I grow. This is how I heal. This is how I improve. So coaching for the way that I work as a coach may involve more like, okay, this is your challenge for the week. Normally you might be avoiding this type of uncomfortable experience, but we're going to expose you to it so you become more comfortable and more resilient. A lot of people think that, mental health and everything that comes along with it is about like being happy and being positive all the time and stuff like that. But actually that keeps us more in a prison. And what we want to do is help a person develop not this sort of like house of cards strategy that's really perfectionism where you're just avoiding anything that might make you feel discomfort, but actually want to help people gain the tools to be able to experience life's inevitable discomforts and be more resilient to that. So just to come back to your question about, therapy versus coaching. Coaching, the way that I work as a coach is a lot more directive, a lot more kind of like, okay, this is what I'm seeing. Here's the kind of like where we need to go from here. Here are some of the more like challenges and tasks and things for you to do in between our sessions. And whereas like in the therapy part, and again, like sometimes I say I do therapy directed coaching, there's a lot more like processing of trauma, for example, or just even as therapists, we distinguish between something called process versus content. And the content is kind of the stuff that's like said and talked about. And sometimes, again, it's strategy. And this is the thing I'm struggling with in my business and da, da, da. Whereas the therapy, the process piece is more like, oh, this is a theme that I've noticed, or this is something that's happening with us in the room right now, or here's how I'm experiencing you actually, and like, I wonder if other people are having a similar experience. And that might be one of the reasons that you're feeling, disconnected from your partner, or that, you have such a high turnover, or that you're getting these negative reviews from people who are leaving the company. So yeah, like I would say they're really closely connected. And I think oftentimes I will just use coaching more because it has less of a stigma, right? Like again, especially for men, they're going to be more likely to go to a coach who they feel is going to kind of like pull them to some sort of, goal that they want to achieve than go to a therapist. And what they realize through the work is actually do a lot more therapy and coaching than they're expecting.
I don't want to make this like too gender specific here, but no. You do identify that like, men tend to have more of this issue or more need.
Totally.
And also let's also just demographics. I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
half of the business owners in this country are not only over the age of 50, but the majority of them are still male. So
Yeah.
there is that audience that's out there. How would I know if I needed a coach? Like you've got some strategies to, for helping people with their mental health, business owners, which I do want to get to. But
Sure.
before we even get to that, we have to, we have to recognize that there's a problem, or that
Totally.
I'm in need. How would I know that? Like, what signs do you see where you're like, hey, you really could use somebody to talk to?
Totally. So, I mean, the thing is, especially for men, because you were taught that you're not supposed to have emotions, a lot of men especially are very disconnected from their emotions. So they might not even notice if they're feeling depressed, or they might not realize it's depression, or they're struggling with anxiety or something like that. They're more likely to notice things like, I haven't been sleeping, or I'm getting in a lot of fights with my partner, or if they have some sort of like vice or addictive behavior, I've been drinking more, I've been smoking more, I've been, eating more, essentially coming back to what I said before about how so much of this healing work is learning how to be with our uncomfortable emotions and cope with them in a healthier way, and not react to them, but to respond to them with wisdom. Because so many people, and again, so many men are not taught to learn how to sit with those emotions, they will try to turn them off as much as possible. So basically the ways that we avoid those uncomfortable emotions is perfectionism, which is we just kind of like avoid anything that might make us feel something uncomfortable, or addictions, essentially, like numbing. So how do we numb that feeling, that uncomfortable, that loneliness, that anxiety, that sadness, that hurt, that heartbreak, whatever it is that the person's going through. So those sort of symptoms.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so what I'm getting from you is that if I'm doing things that I know, I mean, just common sense, I'm drinking too much, or I'm snapping out too much at my partner, or maybe I'm just walking around like, day after day, I'm just not, I don't feel to be happy,
Exactly.
what I mean? Like, and we know that. I mean, as much as we try to tamper down those feelings, I mean, it's not like we're completely disconnected from, reality.
Totally.
So I guess the message is that, for people that are watching this or listening to this, if you're running a business and you do have some of those signs, or you are showing some of those behaviors, I mean, it could be a sign that you could be, you should be talking to somebody that it could help. Which brings me to my next question before we get to some of your
I'll just add one more thing to that, just before you go there, Gene. Just also like physical health issues is a big one too. So again, when we kind of suppress and ignore our emotional pain for long enough, it comes out psychosomatically. So it comes out in our body. So things like back pain, headaches, gut issues, chronic pain of really any sort. There are essentially just always looking for like, okay, whatever this thing is that I'm struggling with, could it be a symptom of something emotional? We tend to look at symptoms and be like, oh, let's just try to treat the symptom, take a pill, and really it's like, well, that's interesting. Is there a constellation of symptoms here that's leading to something deeper? And could that be something emotional that I'm avoiding or suppressing?
And I guess, honestly, if you're seeing your doctor, I mean, it's a question to ask your doctor as to whether or not, are some of my physical ailments stress related or job related.
Totally.
It might not necessarily be something that's organically from inside my body.
Exactly.
Okay. So say I was like, it would help me to talk to someone. I'm assuming that I would find someone like yourself. I mean, obviously going to conferences is great. Listening to podcasts like this is great. I'm assuming you can Google, you can search on LinkedIn. You can ask other, your friends and colleagues if they have it. So there's a wide variety of sources. How do I know if you're the right coach for me, or the right therapist for me?
That's a great question. You don't, right? You don't until you really start working with that person, but you can get a better sense as to whether I'm the right person for you, or this, whatever coach or therapist is the right person for you, by just like doing a consultation call. Most coaches will offer some form of like exploratory call or consult, maybe about 20 to 25 minutes long. Right. And yes, you want to kind of share, hey, this is what I've been dealing with. I'm wondering if, you might be the right person to help me. But what you're really looking for is just rapport, like your relationship, because that time and time again, when we look at kind of what the variables are that lead to success in counseling and coaching relationships, it's the relationship. So, not everybody, I know that I am not a fit for everyone, right? Like I, again, tend to be a bit more directive. I'm a fast talking, not New Yorker by birth, but, New Yorker. And, not a lot of people don't want to work with a woman who's often younger than them, right? So I'm not going to be a fit for everyone. But, I'm a fit for a lot of people, right? It's the same thing as if you are looking for a hairdresser or, something like that, right? So I encourage people to do a consultation call. But the other piece that can be really helpful is if you're open to it, ask your friends, ask your colleagues, hey, do you have anyone you work with that you can recommend? Because, especially the coaching industry, but even, therapists as well, it's kind of the Wild West out there. And there are a lot of people who are drawn to this work because of their own suffering, and their own kind of like morbid curiosity about their struggles, or, they maybe there's a lot of, especially in social media world, there's a lot of like arrogance and narcissism and people who are like, I know everything, so I will be your coach, right? So like, just because someone is a coach, just because they've marketed themselves really well, that does not necessarily mean they're the right person for you. So I would say consultation calls, and then word of mouth is the best, because then you already have it vetted by somebody you trust. You already know that that person is legit, or can offer services that you could probably benefit from. So those would be my two main suggestions.
And is your the services, first of all, that consultation, I mean, obviously it's all different with coach, but I'm assuming that's probably a no cost kind of thing,
totally.
right? I mean,
yeah.
Okay.
Like Sorry, go ahead.
A good professional will do that. You know what I mean? I do that in my own business. I mean, we consult with lots of people, and we don't charge.
And there are some people who won't, because, again, maybe they're just at a point where they're like, I just don't like, my time is so valuable that, you have to pay the whatever it is. And you could take that risk if you wanted to, but there are still many, many coaches and therapists out there who will happily offer you like a 20-minute exploratory call. Okay. Complimentary. Yeah.
Thoughts on online versus in person?
So, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have said like absolutely in person only. And like, what is this thing that people are doing, and how do they believe that we can do good work, remotely? But that's really changed. I think the pandemic really helped change that in many ways. For a lot of my clients and for a lot of business owners, they don't have a ton of time, right? So to be able to fit in an hour, I mean, it's not ideal to kind of like context shift, right away from like a coaching session into, like an important meeting or something like that. But to be able to fit that time in to see me from their home or from their office or whatever allows them to do something they wouldn't do otherwise. Now, I would say if you have all the time in the world, if you appreciate, for some people, I have some clients I see in person who like the kind of commute, right? They're like, okay, I like to shift and have somewhere to go and, not like be able to like, in the car on the way there to kind of listen to some music or process on the way back. So if you have the time, great. The other piece that is really valuable about in-person work is you get to see the whole person, right? So as therapists and coaches, we're not just looking at what's said, right? We're also looking at, oh, that's interesting. They started tapping their foot when they started talking about that thing, right? Or, oh, that's interesting. There's something like, it seems like there's a real shift in the body language, right? Or, hey, let me hand you a Kleenex when something hard comes up, right? So there are things that cannot necessarily be replicated yet. I think probably with like virtual reality, that will change over time. But, there are some things that can't be replicated through telehealth, but there's still amazing work that can be done. So don't let that hold you back from seeing someone.
Great advice. And by the way, just as an ad, I would prefer to see somebody in person. I think that it just, it is. It's sort of like, when I travel and I get out of the office, for like a day or two, it clears your head, and it puts you like in another state. Yeah. And I think that's also an important thing, but that's just my personal opinion.
No, and there's an energetic piece there too, right? Like just being in the room with someone, there is something energetic if you're into kind of quantum physics and stuff like that, that you can't necessarily connect over online.
I believe that. I believe that. Okay. So you wrote a great piece in Forbes. And for those of you guys watching or listening to this, the piece is called 7 Strategies Every Entrepreneur Should Employ to Optimize Their Mental Health. So Megan, if I can ask you to list out all, no, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that because you wrote it a while ago.
I'm like, 1 second, let me pull it up.
No, you don't have to do that either. We're not going to go through all, you gave 7 pieces of advice. Mm-hmm. We're not going to go through all 7, but I do want to pick out a couple of them that I thought you could emphasize on. A couple that hit home. I mean, for example, one of your pieces of advice about making self-care and vacation a non-negotiable. Just personally, so my wife started up a nonprofit like 3 years ago. She's been super busy with it. She's grown it she's amazing. She's grown it incredibly. She's been under a lot of stress and pressure because of it. This is a woman who has tried every different type of exercise and activity over the 30 years I've been married to her. She failed at them all, but she started, she's picked up Pilates over the past few months and absolutely loves it.
Great. And, love Pilates.
And she has, this is talk about a breakthrough. She's made it a point. She goes to Pilates. I mean, no matter what's going on, I think she learned that from me because I play squash like 3 times a week.
Awesome.
And
love that.
Regardless of what's going on, and I go and I play because it's awesome and whatever. So it is non-negotiable, that self-care. Give me your thoughts on self-care and why it should be non-negotiable.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, that's so great, Gene, that you play squash 3 times a week and your wife has made Pilates a non-negotiable as well. Like those are great examples of self-care. And there are a number of reasons as to why self-care is so important. Like, but first of all, I mean, self-care, you could say, is really just like doing anything that kind of contributes to your like physical, mental well-being. It's interesting. A lot of people are like, oh, I've got to do my like morning routine and I have to do that. I have to get up at this 5 o'clock and go to the gym and this and this and that. I would say try to find something that feels not necessarily like super easy, but a little more easeful than like the thing that you hate the most, right? So if you don't like going to the gym, don't force yourself to go to the gym. That's where something like squash is going to be a better fit, right? So something that sure may be helpful for your physical health, but also it's really about mental health. It's about, if you think about like your inner child, if you do any of that work ever, where it's like, hey, let me look back to this like, 5, 10, 15-year-old me and try to be kind to myself and look at like what I needed at the time. What would be something nurturing? What would be something uplifting? What would be something that offered me like connection to others or to myself? So with self-care, a lot of what we're trying to do is regulate our nervous system. So a lot of mental illness or mental health challenges comes from a dysregulated nervous system, meaning that we're kind of stuck in like fight, flight, or freeze, if you're familiar with those terms. The parasympathetic nervous system versus a sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is what kicks on when we're in a stress response. And that's, again, when we get that like kind of fight or flight, whereas freeze is what we call parasympathetic shutdown, where we kind of like, it's kind of like we've got the like freeze response like really intensely to a stressor. And that's when we ultimately end up feeling depressed or feeling really lethargic. So that stuff is less important than just like, hey, a lot of the times if we're feeling anxious, depressed, out of sorts, it's a dysregulated nervous system. That's oftentimes the reason that we're using addictions or using substances and stuff like that to try to regulate it. So self-care is one way we do that. That is a much healthier way, of course. So yes, movement is great for that because it gets us into our body, stimulates what we call the vagus nerve, a lot of this work, which again helps us regulate the nervous system. But the other piece is like a lot of the stuff is like meditation in many ways, right? Like when you're going to Pilates or when your wife's going to Pilates, or when you're going to play squash, you're not looking at your phone, I imagine, right? Like you're not kind of looking at whatever emails come in. You're not being constantly stimulated by that. And you're actually very present. Like, I mean, to play squash, I was a tennis player. Like you've got it, like you have to be really present that whole time.
You're focused on the game. You're focused on the game. Like and what's really funny about that? It's just because I think this is applicable is that I'm looking at my emails before I start playing. And then I get on the court for an hour and I even forget the emails that I was looking at.
Yes.
It completely changes your state.
Totally. It's meditative. It allows you to be fully present. And it's also a bit, especially if you're dealing with a lot of stress, it is sort of a reprieve or an escape from that constant anxiety, that constant inner voice, which, we'll probably get to, that is really at the root of so much of our anxiety, depression, shame, all of that kind of stuff. So, and one thing that's just really important for self-care, because yes, like exercise is a great example, but also like, there's the kind of classic examples of like having the bath, or going for the walk or, reading or doing a puzzle or listening to music or a podcast or whatever. Watching TV, honestly, is great self-care. And another part of self-care is like boundaries, right? So it's not just adding more, it's also saying no. It's giving yourself a break. And the most important piece for self-care is, what is your relationship to the self-care or your relationship to yourself when you're engaging in self-care? So the problem that a lot of people experience is they beat themselves up for doing it. So like, this isn't productive. I'm not being productive. Or, oh no, I went down like an Instagram hole, or I, binge watched like 3 shows in a row on Netflix. And, if we kind of change our relationship to that and say like, hey, maybe you needed a break. Like maybe this was what you needed. And actually like, maybe it's not ideal to make all of your self-care going down an Instagram hole because there's a lot on there that's going to make you feel worse about yourself, right? But if you can just be intentional about whatever it is you're doing and saying, hey, this is what I need. Like I would expect a friend or loved one to take breaks, to take vacation, to not just be like total workaholics. Because otherwise it's like, what's the point? Why are we doing this? If, it's ultimately our relationship to ourselves is that we always have to be working no matter what. And if we don't, then we're terrible people or, we're going to fail. So I would just say like, whatever you do for self-care, for the most part, like anything can be self-care. It's more about your relationship to whatever that activity is that determines it. So
spoken like a true Canadian to an American, you guys have figured all of that out, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Americans, exactly. It seemed like that we violate that rule.
Yeah. We call you guys no vacation nation.
Yeah. Which is ridiculous. Which is why I think Europeans are, it takes so many more vacations because it's an older, smarter society over in Europe,
Totally. Yeah, it's just
Uh,
less capitalist in that sense. And
yeah.
again, there probably, there'd be arguments that it's like, well, they're smaller and, it's more able to, have universal health care and all of those sorts of things. But, at the end of the day, like there is this sort of American dream that gets perpetuated through stories that we're exposed to and through media. And it says everyone should work to get to this point. And when you're successful enough, that's what's going to make you happy. And that's not what makes you happy. I have clients who are wildly successful who come to me after their, billion-dollar businesses or whatever, like are humming along, but they're like, I'm miserable. I'm so unhappy. I'm so depressed. What's wrong with me?
Yeah.
And so that's not the answer.
Well, that brings me to, and we're running out of time. I mean, I've covered like 10% of what I want to talk about.
We'll do a part two.
We'll have to do a part two, but I'm going to combine two of the
Sure.
of the strategies together because I think they are really related, and they definitely hit home because I hear this from a lot of clients, and we all suffer from this. And again, this gets back to a guy thing. So one strategy you say is notice where expectations are ruining your life, right? Mm-hmm. Because as I can tell you, I think men have different expectations for themselves than women do. And I feel that men are more inclined towards the businessy, professional, defined by their careers. Yeah. And we all, very few of us turn out that way. Mm-hmm. So we're like always like not hitting that mark.
Totally.
And then related to that, and you kind of touched on this just before, is about redefining what exactly success and failure means.
Yes.
So noticing where expectations are ruining your life, redefining what success and failure means to you. Talk to us about what you mean by those two strategies.
Yeah. So, I mean, you used a great example differentiating the expectations that men versus women have on themselves. Like women, in contrast, are kind of socialized to put all of our worth into like our appearance or our childbearing or whether or not we're a partner. And if we're like, unmarried or childless by a certain age, we're like, oh my gosh, I've failed, right? So that's where we've been taught our worth lies, right? Whereas for men, your worth lies in power, in financial security, in success, in, things that are all kind of in that realm. And you're socialized to, put your worth into that and say like, okay, well, if I'm not super independent, or if I don't have a ton of money, or if I, don't have a really high salary, or I'm not sort of revered as this powerful leader or whatever, then I've failed. So,
and there's always the guy, the fraternity brother from college, the whatever, that's like crushing it financially, that's doing that much better,
Totally. Of course. Exactly. There's always, oh my gosh, there's especially again with social media these days, like it was one thing if you
everybody's fabulous.
Right. Exactly. And everyone's sort of the highlight reel and whatnot. And so yes, there's always somewhere to compare and despair yourself to, right? So expectations, they really are like expectations for ourselves, expectations for how our lives should go, expectations for others. This is really what's at the root of most of our suffering. I practice through a fairly spiritual lens. A lot of the work that I do is informed by Buddhism. And that is sort of like one of the tenets is that, hey, like, you know what? Life is filled with suffering, right? Life is filled with disappointment, grief, anxiety, sadness, loneliness, anger. All of these are just normal human emotions. And in fact, they're actually signals that are there to give us information. And that's a huge part of the work that I do too, is help people see that our difficult emotions are not meant to be ignored or suppressed. They're meant to be kind of curiously paid attention to and see if there's kind of information that we need to gather from them. Like anger, for example, is usually a sign someone's crossed a boundary or you're being mistreated in some way or you need to advocate, right? Like anxiety says, hey, there's some sort of threat or you need to do something. So ultimately, this is just coming back to, having realistic expectations for everything is that life is going to be filled with all of these uncomfortable emotions. And, you're not going to be perfect. Your life is not going to be perfect. The people around you, your employees, your colleagues, your partner, like nobody is going to constantly meet the expectations that you have if they're unrealistic, right? So, one of my favorite sayings is, all of our pain lives in the space between expectation and reality. So things like disappointment, again, anxiety, sadness, frustration, all of that lives in this place where if you have these unrealistically high expectations and your reality has like a pretty good chance of falling beneath it, you're going to create those difficult emotions yourself. And the same goes for your expectations for yourself, right? If you expect that you're never going to get sick, you're never going to have lower energy days, you're never going to make a mistake, you're never going to, quote unquote, fail, which, we'll get into about the diversifying your worth piece, is then of course you're going to experience things like disappointment and anxiety and shame, especially, and frustration and all of those sorts of things. So it's not that we necessarily need to, get rid of all expectations. Of course you need to have expectations, especially as a business owner, especially when you're trying to grow a company, right? And you want to have expectations for yourself for growth as well, right? I mean, I think most of us, as humans, we do desire growth and stimulation and challenge and all of those sorts of things. So you still want to have expectations, but you want to be mindful that they're realistic, right? So they're more likely to be achieved, or if you're not going to achieve them, it's going to be a smaller space where you're like, okay, I almost got there, but it's still like, so you don't feel just like this paralyzation, shame, disempowerment, all of that. So you want to make sure that those expectations are like realistic. And then you also want to make them flexible. So one of my favorite things that I do, I've done for over a decade at this point and really recommend for my clients, it's embedded in something called self-compassion, where we basically, when you are experiencing something uncomfortable, let's say you're feeling anxious or you're feeling sad or lonely or whatever it is, angry, you just say, it's understandable I'm feeling anxious or stressed because, and you just find validation and empathy for like, why does it make sense that you're feeling whatever it is that you're feeling? And what that does is it makes some space for the feeling rather than feeling shame for feeling the feeling. What happens is when we feel something uncomfortable, we tend to judge ourselves for it. And when we judge ourselves for it, we now not only feel, let's say like, oh, you're feeling really lonely, right? Because entrepreneurship is extremely isolating.
Sure.
So let's say you're feeling lonely and then you're like, oh, you're so weak. I can't believe you're lonely. This is like smoking 10 cigarettes a day or whatever it is. You're beating yourself up. You're going to feel shame. And then you're also feeling anxious. Oh, you're feeling lonely. You got to get rid of this. So instead, it's like, it's understandable you're feeling lonely. You've been working really hard, oftentimes alone, or all your employees are remote. And also like part of getting rid of loneliness is about being vulnerable, right? And we can't always be super vulnerable in work settings because we have to embody, leadership and whatnot. And we don't want to necessarily show parts of ourselves.
You have to give a different, portrayal of yourself, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you're trying to be the image, right?
Exactly. So the first piece I would say is yes, like you kind of make some room and have realistic expectations for how you're feeling. And then let's say you're beating yourself up for, a mistake that you made or something that went wrong with the business. It's also creating more realistic expectations for that, right? So like, It's understandable that, I don't know, you didn't meet this goal that you had for yourself because now let's find the reason as to why you didn't meet it. So you can now learn from this. And then through that, failures become learning opportunities.
Right.
Failure kind of, I often tell my clients, say like, hey, if you experience some sort of failure, congratulate yourself because that means you stepped out of your comfort zone. That means you took a risk versus listening to perfectionism, which says like, hey, you shouldn't do that thing because you can't guarantee that you're going to succeed. And that allows you to then grow through that experience and recognize, okay, it didn't work this time, but here's what I need to do in the future.
Megan, final question, I'll let you go. This is just great advice. These strategies are super, super helpful. What kind of a client would you decline to work for?
That's a good question. So I would say just any client who has unrealistic expectations for the process. So that's part of the exploratory call, right? Is like, hey, let's figure out what is it that you're wanting to get out of this, and does that seem like something we can work toward together? I similarly, like, I would decline a client who is coming, like, if they're, let's say, already employing a ton of different strategies for like productivity and efficiency, and they're coming to be even more productive. They're coming to almost like be harder on themselves because that happens a lot. Like you will get, and there are coaches out there who will say like, yeah, like we're going to help hold you that much more accountable and we're going to get you up that much earlier. And you're going to like, they're almost, reinforcing the perfectionism that I'm trying to help dispel within people. So
you're like, it's good enough. You're fine.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
chill out.
Like I'm hyper attuned to where people are creating suffering for themselves by trying to hold themselves more accountable and be harder on themselves. Sure. And again, we often think, especially if we were raised in families where like that was sort of how we grew up, and a more sort of authoritarian parenting style and like high expectations and not a lot of warmth and stuff like that, that feels comfortable and familiar. But what people don't realize is that way of relating to themselves is actually what's contributing to the depression, to actually the avoidance, oftentimes not doing the things that, they should be doing for that very success they're looking for, and to ultimately just not being happy, right? Like, sure. And so if somebody does come to me and they're like, I just want to be like that much more, productive and this essentially like a machine, it's probably, I'm just not really the right fit for them, because just fundamentally, I would feel like that would be an abusive relationship that I was trying to maintain for them, that they're having with themselves and that they ultimately might have with me. So it's not that I don't believe in, holding people accountable. And I'll try to summarize this quickly because I think this is often helpful for people. The way that I work is something called the yin and the yang of compassion. So that's like the feminine and the masculine of compassion. When we think about being compassionate to others and to ourselves, we're often kind of aversive to that because we're like, oh, like that seems like I'll just like let up on myself and I'll gain 100 pounds and never get out of bed and I won't get anything done. And I'll just watch TV all day and eat Cheetos. And like, first of all, that wouldn't be a good life for anyone. Like nobody wants that, right? That's not stimulating or enjoyable. But the other piece is that yes, that there is a lot of stuff within what we call the yin, the feminine, like forgiveness, tolerance, patience, compassion, sympathy, empathy, like all that kind of stuff. But there's also a yang, a masculine to compassion, which is about accountability and respect for oneself and expectations and all of those sorts of things, desiring growth. So it's the same way with, it sounds like you have kids?
I do.
You do? Okay. So it's same thing with parenting, right? Like you want to, of course, have a lot of warmth and a lot of support, but you also want to have high flexible expectations. Exactly. Sure. So, coaching, therapy, all of that, it's really about reparenting ourselves. It's really about learning how to develop a relationship to ourselves that embodies both like warmth and love and sympathy and understanding that we're imperfect humans. And of course we're going to make mistakes and look imperfect. But the other piece is that, we do have expectations for ourselves. And that is an act of self-love to have expectations. So that's a big piece as well that I work on with people, but just finding that more realistic balance.
Megan Bruneau is a psychologist, therapist, and an executive coach. She is the author of a great Forbes article, which has been a lot of the base of this conversation. It's called 7 Strategies Every Entrepreneur Should Employ to Optimize Their Mental Health. She is also the author of a book, How to Be Alone and Together, and she produces and hosts a podcast, The Failure Factor. Megan, is there a website that we can reach you on?
Absolutely. Just my name, meganbruneau.com. So MEGANBRUNEAU, which you pronounce so lovely or so well. So you can just reach me there or, you can reach out just Megan at meganbruneau.com as well.
Sounds
if you
good.
want to have any questions, want to work together, anything like that.
Well, thank you very much. Your advice has been fantastic. I know I learned a lot from this conversation, so we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Jane. Great talking today.
Everyone, you have been watching and listening to the Hartford Small Biz Ahead podcast. If you need any advice or tips or help in running your business, please visit us at smallbizahead.com or sba.thehartford.com. My name is Gene Marks. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back to you soon with another episode. Take care.